Here's the deal. There was a post on the King James Only Facebook page. It's got over 580 comments on it, which is ridiculous. I'm just expressing that. A woman on there mentioned that she likes seeing all those comments, given the thread being so long, just so that she can learn and whatnot. That's fine, but over 580 comments, that is ridiculous. Most of what I'm seeing is there's a lot of King James only people on this thread making comments, and I've even seen some every now and then, maybe one or two people say 1611 King James only. Well, the most bashing that is taking place is the New King James Version. And the King James only crowd want to express that the New King James Version is perverted, is corrupt, is illegitimate, blah, blah, blah. Then you have some people throwing out, well, the New American Standard, the NIV, the whatever, and so on and so forth. So we have King James only people, and then we have Alexandrian text type supporters, and the New King James Version is getting the primary blow because this lady said King James or New King James Version. Which one would be the better text? Okay, if you just want to just bear with the text in general, because I'm going to express this. When it comes to the King James Version, there's like at least 2 to 3 different versions of the King James in general. You have from the 1611 type to the 2016 type, and even though they read the same word for word pretty much, the language from 1611 English to today is different. I can read it. Sometimes it's a little hard, but I can read it. I'm just a little slow at reading it. But most people today can't or won't be able to read 1611 English. So the people espousing 1611 King James only is ridiculous because we don't talk that way anymore. If I expressed John, how art thou in thy neighborhood, most people aren't going to know what in the world I'm saying. A lot of people nowadays express through like texting and stuff, that because we hardly ever talk anymore to each other, so everything's online now, so we mainly use abbreviations anymore. So getting off of that, I have a King James only friend up in the northwestern part of the state, not too far from Oklahoma City, but up past that way. He's a friend of mine. He's a lot older than me, but we talk off and on, and he's King James only. And I elaborated to him that, and you King James only people are going to have a falling out when I say this, which I've already expressed it in the feed, is that the New King James Version is the little brother to the King James. And you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you said that. That is not true. That's a lie, blah, blah. This is why I say that. There are some places in the New King James and versus the King James where it appears that the verse has been flipped or whatever. Some different words are used in the New King James versus the King James. But for the most part, the New King James Version is built off of the King James. It's just more clear language. It's just like, for instance, another example, the Modern English Version it reads just like the King James, except for in some places where 1 John 5:7 is translated really weird. I don't know why, but it is. But it's supposed to be the bridge between the King James and New King James. I don't think that was even necessary. So anyway, getting off the MEV, the King James and New King James are kin in the sense that the New King James was built off the King James, and they're both Textus Receptus translations, okay? Alright? And if someone tells you that it's not, or tell me in the comments of this video that it's not, that is a lie. You need to do your research more adequately, because here's the thing. The King James only crowd, if you really think about it, the King James Version is not the first English translation that existed, okay? The reason why people are so crazy about it is because it's considered the authorized version. Well, the Geneva version is also an authorized version by King Henry VIII, if I recall correctly. So you have two authorized versions, and the Geneva translation helped build the King James of the 1611 translation, along with the bishops, William Tyndale's Matthew Bible, and so forth. Okay, there's like 6 to 9 sources that help build, including a Spanish translation, and even the Dewey Rhymes, for crying out loud, was used to help build the King James Version, which the Dewey Rhymes is in a sense, a Jesuit translation of the Alexandrian text, but still it was used. Anyway, carrying on. The problem is the lack of understanding the textual history behind the translations. Personally, that's what I do, is try to educate people on that, but then you get people who are stubborn, who won't listen to what you say. That's fine. Okay, I can't stop you from using the King James. I'm not going to. If that's what you want to use, fine. I've preached at churches or King James only. I preach from a King James version because why? I like the King James. It flows. It's like power coming off the pages. I got my best friend. He preaches from a New King James. My new pastor over here preaches from a New King James. There's nothing wrong with the New King James, but for some reason, the Alexandrian text type supporters of the modern age attack. They'll say, well, these translations over here are better, the ones that have verses missing from them, and then the King James only guys want to eliminate the New King James Version because it says, well, they take Jehovah out and they take God out and this and that. Well, people who are expressing that don't say where. And then I'll express this. People who assume that the word Jehovah is removed from the Bible, period, in the New King James Version, okay, when you find in Genesis chapter 2 when it says Lord in all uppercase letters, if you look in the Strong's Concordance in the Hebrew, the Hebrew word Lord all upper cases is Jehovah. So the word is there, it's just not the word Jehovah used there, it's the word Lord, okay? Now here's the thing you got to understand. Jews of ancient time and Jews even probably today, whenever they're transmitting the word of God's name, they would go so far as to take a bath, break the quill, and other things every time they wrote the name of God, and they wouldn't even espouse God's name in public. Okay, so here's the deal. Arguing over little words and stuff like which that sounds bad, but because the word Jehovah is not found in the text, if you use a Strong's Concordance, you'll know that the word Lord in all upper cases means Jehovah, which we get the English word Jehovah from, which means existing one. Okay? It's like the word Yahweh, for instance. We express that it's spelled Y-A-H-A Y or something like that, and yet we don't even know for sure exactly how it's really spelled, because there's only really 3 letters that's used for the term Yahweh. And then God's got other names like Jehovah Sidkenu. You can't even see that in the text unless you look in the Strong's Concordance, because like you have the phrase the God who God sees, God who hears, so on and so forth. God has many, many, many names. But people get so hung up on minute things that they're not seeing the bigger picture. Okay? There's a bigger difference than using substitute words like Lord for Jehovah versus whole freaking passages taken out, like 1 John 5:7, Acts 8:37, John 7:53 through 8:11, or Mark 16:9 through 20. So here's the thing, and I have to do this myself. Before you go on the massive attack because someone asks a question and someone expresses, like for instance, she said, which translation is the best one to get? Instead of going on this massive tangent of 500 million comments slamming the New King James Version on how it's supposedly corrupt and stuff, just say, hey, I prefer the King James Version, or I prefer the New King James Version. And like I said on there, she should have just done a poll. That would have been a whole lot simpler. But basically, the reason why I was doing this video is because the King James only crowd is hung up on the King James because it's mainly through traditional means, in the sense of, well, our particular church is King James only, and that is the only inspired Word of God. Okay, well, if that's the case, then you might as well believe in spontaneous generation of evolution, because if the King James Version is the only inspired Word of God, then we have a serious problem. Okay? I've even had preachers tell me to my face that the English is it, and that the Greek and Hebrew don't even matter, it's irrelevant. So here's the thing. People who say that are basically telling me that the Greek and Hebrew in Aramaic, because the book of Daniel was partially written in Aramaic or Chaldean, is basically null and void. So the original autographs that God told the original authors to write down, like Paul, John, and Luke, and Matthew, and Mark, and even the Old Testament writers, these guys, King James only guys, are saying that is null and void, and that the English is God's chosen language. Personally, I beg to differ. I'll give you one example. In the King James Version of the New Testament, I preached on a passage a while back, and I can't remember, but it used the word ecclesia, Ekklesia, I believe is how it's spelled. The word ecclesia can mean congregation, church, or a group of people. And so there's a passage in the King James Version that said that basically it called the people in the wilderness, when Moses was leading the Jews to the promised land for 40 years in the wilderness, it called them the church, even though the word was appropriate in the Greek ecclesia. It was the wrong English translated term. It should have said like gathering or whatever besides church, because the church did not exist in the Old Testament. The New Testament bears the church age, and I believe personally it started on the day of Pentecost. Okay, so anyway, with that said, that is just what I wanted to say about the King James only guys slamming the New King James Version, and then the other guys who are using the corrupt text. You know, it's a whole mess, and I cannot address everything in short snippet videos and all that. It'll take like hours at a time. So with that said, I'm just doing this to be informative. I'm not trying to get on anyone's case. If you're King James only, like I told a church in Arkansas, just stay there. That's a TR translation. Just stay there, okay? But don't try to tell somebody that the King James Version is the only inspired Word of God when it is not, okay? It's just, I believe that the words are inspired, the text itself, but it's mainly the underlying Greek text is where the inspiration mainly is. Okay, we can't place our faith 100% in a English translation, or any translation for that matter, as in the way it's worded and stuff, because there's going to be problems. That's why we always have to revert back to the Greek, Hebrew, and the Aramaic of the original autographs. And also, a guy named Theodore Letus, who died in 2005, he was a scholar, very good man. Although he was a Reformed Lutheran, I learned some things from him. He's got some YouTube videos. He said he's King James only, but he said that if you have to get someone started on the New King James and then over time get them to fall back on the King James. Well, I would somewhat disagree with that, because I don't think that's completely necessary, but I think the King James flows better, mainly because the way it's worded in areas like Jude 1:1. It's a better wording than the New King James Version. But the New King James Version is better understandable. And if you really want to take it further, there's a more literal translation done by J.P. Green. He dubbed it the King James 3, which is a more literal translation, and it reads just like the New King James Version. So with that said, that's all I got. So if you disagree with me, fine. If not, then good for you. I'm just trying to inform people, and that's pretty much it.